On July 20th, 2012, what began as an ordinary midnight movie premiere turned into one of the most horrifying mass shootings in modern American history. Inside a packed theater in Aurora, Colorado, hundreds of people gathered in excitement to watch The Dark Knight Rises, the final installment in Christopher Nolan's Batman trilogy. The atmosphere was electric, fans in costumes, friends laughing, and the thrill of a long-awaited film filling the air. But within minutes, that excitement would transform into chaos, fear, and unimaginable tragedy. At approximately 12:30 a.m., about half an hour into the film, a man named James Holmes quietly exited Theater 9 through an emergency door near the screen. Few noticed his departure. The theater was dark, the movie loud, and the audience completely immersed in the story unfolding before them. Outside, Holmes moved with purpose. He retrieved weapons from his car and dressed himself in tactical gear. Black clothing, a gas mask, ballistic helmet, and protective armor covering much of his body. He was prepared, calculated, and heavily armed. Moments later, he re-entered the theater through the same emergency exit. At first, many in the audience didn't recognize the danger. Some assumed he was part of the show, perhaps a promotional stunt or a fan dressed as a character. Midnight premieres often attracted people in costume, and nothing seemed immediately unusual. Then, everything changed. Holmes threw canisters into the crowd. A strange gas began to spread through the theater, irritating eyes and throats, filling the air with confusion and panic. Visibility dropped. People coughed, rubbed their eyes, and tried to make sense of what was happening. Seconds later, gunfire erupted. Holmes opened fire with multiple weapons, including a shotgun, a semi-automatic rifle, and a handgun. The sound of gunshots echoed violently through the enclosed space. What many initially mistook for sound effects quickly revealed itself as something far more real and far more terrifying. Panic spread instantly. People screamed, ducked, and scrambled for cover. Some tried to escape through exits, while others froze in fear. The darkness, combined with the gas and the noise, made it nearly impossible to understand what was happening. In the chaos, individuals were separated from friends and loved ones. Holmes moved methodically, firing into the crowd. Bullets struck seats, walls, and people. Some even passed through the wall into an adjacent theater. Within minutes, dozens were injured, and lives were lost. In total, Holmes fired dozens of rounds. By the time the shooting ended, 12 people had been killed, and 70 others were injured, 58 of them from gunfire. It was one of the deadliest mass shootings in U.S. history at the time and the worst in Colorado since the Columbine High School massacre. Outside the theater, chaos continued. Emergency calls flooded 911 within minutes. Police arrived astonishingly fast, within about 90 seconds of the first reports. Officers found a scene of devastation. Injured victims, scattered weapons, and terrified survivors trying to escape. Holmes, however, was no longer inside. He had calmly walked out of the theater and was found sitting in his car behind the building. Officers approached cautiously, unsure if he was armed or preparing another attack. To their surprise, he did not resist. He was arrested without incident, appearing calm and detached from the horror he had just caused. At first, some officers even mistook him for a fellow police officer because of his tactical gear. But the situation was far from over. Shortly after his arrest, Holmes revealed that his apartment had been rigged with explosives. This revelation triggered a massive evacuation effort. Nearby buildings were cleared as bomb squads prepared to investigate. What they discovered was chilling. Inside the apartment were dozens of homemade explosive devices, including grenades and containers filled with gasoline. The setup was complex and designed to cause further destruction. It took authorities an entire day to safely disarm the explosives using a remote-controlled robot. The scale of preparation suggested that this attack had been carefully planned long in advance. Meanwhile, the nation reacted with shock and grief. News of the shooting spread rapidly across the United States and around the world. Vigils were held for the victims. Flags were lowered to half-staff. The tragedy sparked intense debates about gun control, public safety, and mental health. Even the film industry responded. Warner Brothers, the studio behind The Dark Knight Rises, canceled several premieres and scaled back its marketing campaign out of respect for the victims. The connection between the film and the attack led to widespread concern about copycat incidents. Security at movie theaters across the country was immediately increased. As investigators dug deeper, questions arose about Holmes' mental state and motivations. He later confessed to the shooting but pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity. His defense argued that he was suffering from severe mental illness at the time of the attack. The legal battle that followed was long and complex. The trial began in April 2015, nearly 3 years after the shooting. Prosecutors argued that Holmes had carefully planned the attack and was fully aware of his actions. They presented evidence of his preparations, including weapons, armor, and writings that suggested premeditation. The defense, however, focused on his mental health, arguing that he was experiencing a psychotic episode and could not fully comprehend the consequences of his actions. After months of testimony, the jury reached a verdict. On July 16, 2015, Holmes was found guilty of multiple counts of first-degree murder and attempted murder. Although prosecutors sought the death penalty, the jury could not reach a unanimous decision. As a result, Holmes was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. In total, he received 12 life sentences, one for each victim, along with thousands of additional years for the attempted murders and explosives charges. The impact of the Aurora shooting extended far beyond that night. For survivors, the trauma remained. Many suffered life-altering injuries, both physical and emotional. Families lost loved ones. Communities were left to cope with grief that would not easily fade. At the same time, the tragedy forced a national conversation. It raised difficult questions about how such events can happen and whether they can be prevented. It highlighted the dangers of mass violence and the importance of preparedness, mental health awareness,